Welcome to another episode of the Apex Perspective podcast. Today I have with me Vishal Gupta, who is currently the global CTO and CPO, and he's specifically doing this at, I believe it's called Go Guardian. Now, Vishal is an individual who started off as a analyst and a sales engineer. He narrowed down his focus to leading at the executive level at multiple companies as chief technology officer. He's also built global teams and helped emerge new products to the market. Now, Vishal, can we start with more about your background from your perspective and how it led you to what you're doing today?
Sure. It's a great question, Aryan. Thank you for having me on your show. So, I wish I could tell you it was a very structured, thoughtful journey, but sometimes these things are not as thoughtful and structured as they look in retrospect. But I think there's probably two parts of my career that are interesting. One part is, sort of maybe coming to the US itself, and then kind of going into management consulting because they were both a little bit of an unanticipated move. I came to US in 92, on a fellowship at Dartmouth and actually built a search engine using AI before Google did. My advisor was George Cybenko. He's a very, he came from Urbana-Champaign. And honestly, I had no context of what I had built. So I just didn't know it was an important thing. And so the reason I like to mention that is, sometimes not knowing what you're doing can actually be useful. Otherwise, you may think it's too challenging, it's too
Very
difficult.
interesting.
That's why I think sometimes startups succeed because they actually don't know. Having less information, especially with some of the younger people, may actually be a useful thing. Otherwise, you'll find all the problems. I think the second bit of it that was sort of a little non-traditional is I had a lot of job offers when I was graduating, but I took the one that was least aligned to what I was studying, which was I was doing an MS in computer engineering, and I took on to start as a management consultant. And that was useful because I think I knew nothing about business. I already
Right.
knew a bit about technology, and I would encourage your listeners to think a little bit about risk taking, about developing their whole self, and not just in one area. And it
Mm-hmm.
taught me, how to break a bigger problem into smaller problems, how to present effectively with a senior audience, and I think these skills become very handy when
Wow.
you go
Yeah.
live life. So I think that's a little bit of a non-traditional start of a career, if you may. And
And
then
if
I
I can make a comment, I just want to say that's a very interesting perspective because if you look at even the idea of urgent cares, right? The reason they've expanded so much in the last decade alone is because people understood the business side of things. So
right,
even if there's a thorough understanding of the medical side,
hmm,
to in order to maximize impact, you have to understand the business side of things in order to expand and serve underserved areas specifically. So I think understanding the business perspective was a very important thing to do. So I just want to make that comment really quick.
no, that's a great point, Arian. The only other thing I would add is the one good thing I did do after the management consulting is actually rotate in a number of different functional roles. So, for example, as you mentioned, I went from strategy then into a startup and doing services, professional services for the startup, business services, then technical services. Then I kind of got into sales engineering and doing sales engineering myself, building a team of sales engineers, and then finally kind of went back into leading not only sales engineering globally, but also building solutions on top and things of that nature. And I think why that is also helpful is uh, if you want to be effective at a particular function, it's actually good to experience other functions as well, because that helps you not only build empathy, it helps you then build more compelling solutions because you've
Mm-hmm.
seen the sales side, you've seen the strategy side, you've seen how you
Right.
actually are going to be deploying it for the customers itself, how you'll be building a solution on top. So ultimately, when you go and build these solutions in whatever vertical with whatever technology, you're not just thinking about something in a silo, you're thinking about it in the entire life cycle that happens. So that's kind of what I would say, Orion, or perhaps some of the precursor things that I did in my career that somehow panned out. The
Mm-hmm.
management consulting aspect, the ability to work I guess have exposure with a mentor, like in this case George Savenko, who
Mm-hmm.
was really absolutely amazing, and then just the multifunctional perspective that will let me later build things in a more holistic way.
Certainly. And you, have also gotten experience in people leadership as well, even though your background was more technical at the time. How did you make that transition and what did that teach you?
It's a great question. That transition was a little bit accidental too. And so when
Wow.
I became a sales engineer, I was fortunately good at it. And so the VP of sales approached me saying, "Hey, we're thinking, can you create more people like yourself? And so we think you should become the leader of the sales engineering team that we want to expand." And
Hmm.
I thought he was tricking me. And so I said, "I have no desire to do that." And
Wow.
so 3 months later, he kind of started that again, and he said, "Listen, it's always usually the opposite conversation I'm having with people where they want to be manager, and I'm telling them they're not ready. Here, I'm telling you you're ready, and you're pushing back." And I
Okay.
said, "Oh, because I want to say, I also want to make sure I'm technical." And he said, and he was very smart, the VP of sales. He said, "Okay, we'll make you a working manager." And so that was my introduction to management, almost as a reluctant person getting in, because I was having so much fun with the technology that I thought
Right.
I'll miss it. And so I think what I have learned, and this was sort of back in 98, right? So it's almost like
Sure.
27 years back. And so I did become manager a little early in my career, right? I think I was maybe 27, 28 when I became one. But I think what it taught me was, in some ways it's common sense, right? Because just the way you want to be treated, what do I want in a manager when I'm an individual contributor, right? I want somebody who will appreciate my work, who'll give me clear direction, who'll help me develop, who will give me relevant and constructive feedback, and who'll create a positive work environment, right? so
Hmm.
so I think so those things kind of came naturally to me in terms of, hey, how do I help my team be able to be the best version of themselves, right?
Hmm.
And so I kind of thought more about management in terms of not so much the strategy of the company and this and that, but I thought more from a people perspective, very simply as, okay, how do I help people be the best version of themselves, and how do I serve them, right? Kind of
Hmm.
more the servant sort of model of leadership, to say, um, this is a privilege, and what can I do to find the best people, to put them in the best possible role based on their strengths,
Hmm.
and to take all the barriers out of the way. And I think that has served me well,
Hmm. Hmm.
as I've gone from leading, maybe being a first level manager to now leading teams of thousands of people.
Hmm. Do you think that leadership style changes dependent on the situation, or does it stay uniform across all situations?
I think the values stay uniform, but the style can modulate, right? The values
Hmm.
stay uniform because, see, as a person, unless you respect other people, unless you really want the best for them, I think those are fundamental values, or integrity, right? These are fundamental values that have to stay the
Hmm.
same. But I think where the style can modulate is, some people, everybody has, you need to understand people to be able to manage them effectively, right? And so each
Certainly.
person has their preference on, some people like a lot of direction, some people are like, just leave me alone, right? Some people are really into learning a lot of things, and some people have to be a little bit encouraged about it. And so you cannot have the same style being applied to all. You really do have to modulate based upon what you see as their strengths. How do you see they learn? How do you see they interact? What are their strengths, and what are the areas of development?
Hmm.
But your values do need to stay consistent.
Certainly. So as we fast forward into your career, a lot of what you've been doing is building global teams and having them unified on a single vision and to bring specifically new technologies to market. Now, what I'm very curious about is if you've been building global teams specifically, a lot of what I've learned through the business of mergers and acquisitions is that if this is done globally, potential concerns of clash of culture can arise, other issues like that. How do you manage that? And what did you learn to mitigate or potentially support a transition like this?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Aryan. You know, even though at a fundamental level we're human and we all want, you know, some very simple, straightforward, basic things, the culture and the way to go about it is quite different in different parts of the world. So I've been to 77 countries. I've worked in probably a dozen of them, and I was a expat in India with Cisco for 5 years. As part of the leadership team at Cisco that scaled from 1,000 to 12,000 people when I was there. And so one of the interesting things I learned was, even though I grew up in India, I had never worked in India. And so it's very funny when I went on to, become the head of our global services practice, which was significant, several hundred people, 600 people spread across a lot of places. The HR came to me 6 months after I had joined and said, your team wonders if you like them. And I was thinking, why is that? And they said, because you don't take them out for beers in the weekend. And I'm like, but I thought I learned that you should, respect the family time people have in the weekend and not be disrupting them. Now, that's what I'd learned in the US. Now,
Right.
that did not apply in India, but I had sort of assumed it applied everywhere. And so I never really took them out.
Interesting.
Culture in India was that actually people like to be taken out, and they were never being taken out. They sort of assume the manager doesn't really appreciate them perhaps as much.
Wow.
So that was a very interesting learning for me to say, okay, even though I may look like everybody, I should not assume the culture is exactly the same way. There are
Mhm.
nuances, and I need to learn the nuances. And then you learn, you just stay much more tuned to, okay, in this local culture, how does it really operate? Is it relationship centric? Is it task centric? What is it that people are really after? What works in Australia is very different from what will work in
Of
India, is very
course.
different from what will work in China. And so we ultimately launched a network of these global centers in Middle East, in US, and in India and China. And I did make sure that we were very much attuned to the cultural realities and launching those centers and finding the right leader and enabling those leaders to be successful. And so
Mhm.
I think it's we all know about it, but in the heat of the moment, it's very easy to forget because you have a set of things you've learned over time that have
Certainly.
worked for you, and you sort of have to almost make sure that you can unlearn them as well if needed to what the local nuances are.
And how did it impact actual business operations specifically? Because I know that you've built teams in the US, Middle East, and all around the world. I'm sure at some point they all had to collaborate. How
Yeah,
does actually being in tune with the culture impact the operation itself?
it's a great question. So I think there's a couple principles that lie there, Aryan. One of the things I discovered is, in the US, sometimes we think of everybody in the US as onshore and everybody else offshore. And I saw that was something a lot of companies think about, right? They'll think about any team in Asia as offshore, whether they're in Philippines or China or India or wherever you may be. And I encourage teams to think about everybody as part of a global team. So
Hmm.
we just happen to be in one location. We're all equal. We all have a clear purpose and a clear scope. And so one of the things I learned two things. One, have a site strategy. So if you're a leader that's leading, team of hundreds and thousands of people, there are people dispersed everywhere. Have a clear site strategy for each site that you're going to be in. So that way the team can have clear direction on where they should be building their strength. Number one.
Hmm.
Number two, I learned that, you know, when you're thinking about these teams, think about that each team likes to also have a lot of pride. So not only do they want to know as a site strategy what things I can do, they also want to have a level of ownership and not just have a small function that they're responsible for. And so one of the things I've done in multiple companies, whether it was Cisco or Symantec or now at GoGuardian or at Lexmark, has been that we give people a lot of end-to-end responsibility in those teams. So
Hmm.
that way these teams can move fast, be agile, and not like, in the past I've seen where people will say, oh, in Philippines we'll only do QA. Well, if you're doing that and you're having a team meeting, then one of the people is in a very uncomfortable time zone
Right.
to make it work, right? And then because the time zones are so spread out, they have a lot of time response, and it'll take them a long time to make a decision. You'll have endless meetings and all, right? And so I try to think about giving people a lot of empowerment in each location that they're in based upon the talent they have in that location, based on the exposure they have in that location, and setting
Hmm.
them up for success. So that way, we all think we're part of a global team. We all have roles and responsibilities. We do need to collaborate, but we also need to empower each of these teams to be able to move fast and take as much responsibility as their capability can allow. So we
Hmm.
can actually, create a multiplier effect and not create an effect where we're really dependent on every location in a sequential way.
Hmm. Now, what's also very interesting is if you look at your track record, you've been able to bring many technologies to market specifically. A question I would have for you on that specific regard is actually to give some insight first is I actually had other executives who brought other products to market. Now they could not say too much specifics because they were under NDA, but a part of their process was identifying core truths that were valuable in one industry and then applying those core truths to other ones when they're bringing new products to the market. How do you identify if a product is going to be valuable in a market, and what is your process to basically determine that essentially?
Yeah, I think it's a great but a deep question.
Yeah.
So I'll give you some examples. So, for example, at Cisco, we were building, hospital room of the future. So a lot of we did a lot of disruption in healthcare and in retail, right? And the question is, at that time, and this was maybe 15 years back, right? Sort of in the 2011, 12 timeframe. So we didn't really have cloud, but we had private cloud, right? And so I think the big innovations that time was, instead of every, let's say if we thought about 1,000 clinics, instead of every clinic having something locally, say for video, for telehealth, and local devices which can go bad, then the cost of maintaining the solution is very high. And so the
Mhm.
big innovation we did that time was to say, okay, can we host all these things in a data center and have a good level of bandwidth with each of those locations that can access the data center? And this way, they don't need to do any setup. This way, they don't need to, have anybody for debugging any hardware that happens. And all we need is just to make sure we've got good access speed, and we'll be up and running. And so when we saw that working, obviously, in healthcare and retail and finance, I think we applied that in a very aggressive way
Mm.
when early cloud came to a wide variety of SaaS use cases, say at Semantic and others, to say that, okay, we really want to move very aggressively from on-prem software to cloud-based and SaaS software, because the time to value is just so much shorter with SaaS, right? So by the time I do my R&D, I don't have to worry about each person upgrading. They instantly get the latest version that I want them to have. And I can instantly, if there's a problem, I can change it and nobody has to do anything. And
Mhm.
so I started thinking in terms of friction, right? What is the friction for people to adopt your technology, and how do you take that friction away? And that
Mhm.
same concept then you can apply in other industries too. So, for example, one of the emerging technologies we worked a lot on, I was the co-founder of our IoT efforts, Internet of Things efforts at Cisco, where we said, okay, we'll connect data and things, and the example I was giving in healthcare, you can think about the same thing in retail. And so a lot of the work we learned in saying, okay, in healthcare, you're collecting the data from medical devices. Now, for example, when we were doing the work at Lexmark, uh, now instead of the medical devices, you have the printers, but the same concept applies. And so we took
Mhm.
these printers, we put about 100 sensors in each of them, we collected all the data, and that data helped us not only drive things like predictive maintenance, so we had the best predictive maintenance in the industry, but we fundamentally used it to increase the life of the printer, because we could analyze based on all the data that's getting collected and all the AI and machine learning models that we're running as to what causes things to break. And so
Mhm.
the printers from all the other players were lasting about 4 years, and ours started lasting 7 years. And then we were
Mm.
able to come up with a new business model for the managed print services. So that way we can take advantage of things that's lasting longer and monetize it on a per page or per month basis, as opposed to just sell it as a widget. And so this is the way you can take concepts from one industry, apply it to another. You can think about things like friction for the customers across a variety of dimensions, right? Friction from trying new things, friction from
Mhm.
deploying them, friction from integrating them, friction from getting value. And how do you minimize all of that? Because all of those things will be common no matter what technology you're working on.
Very interesting. And I would like to make a comment on that, but I know we're approaching time. So how about we shift this conversation to you, Vishal? The first question I have for you is, what is something about you or your life that you wish more people knew about?
Wow. I think I think I mentioned it slightly that to me, in technology, we're always looking for the next big thing, the next new thing. And I think one of the things in my life is looking for the next new place, or the next country, or the next city. And so
Mhm.
I've been to 77 countries, almost 600 cities, and I love that exploration, right? I just it energizes me as I go to a new place, a new culture, learn new things, a new language, or learn a new city. And I think that kind of keeps you really, uh, keeps things very excited. So for me, that has been something that has been, that's kept me motivated my last, 30 plus years of industry.
What's the number one learning you've had after visiting 77 countries?
That I think we're all more similar than different.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, but that I actually agree with that. I've been to plenty of places myself, and I think at the at the core, I think we all have very similar universal values, and I think that teaches you more about being able to connect with people and
Yeah, we
understand
need
them.
to bring people together. I think in today's world, we're unfortunately finding more differences instead of focusing on the commonalities.
I agree, and I think the phones are a little bit responsible for that as well,
Yeah,
for sure.
that's right.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and you're absolutely right about that. So what I'll do now is go ahead and share a very quick perspective regarding fitness and health, and we'll go and conclude the podcast with Vishal's plans for this year, whether that's professionally or personally. The perspective I really want to share today is really about challenging the requirements of making a physical transformation. And why I say that is because what a lot of people are taught traditionally is that there's only one uniform or traditional way to make a physical transformation by going to a gym 4 or 5 times a week and being very rigorous on that regard. The issue with that perspective is not all individuals can do that. People who are working all the time or traveling cannot always go to a gym or attend to that. And therefore, it makes it perceived as basically impossible to make a physical transformation. But what really is required is to identify what is the actual driving factor behind losing weight or losing fat, and actually being able to identify a pathway to adhere to those requirements that's very time efficient. So if we look at the core mechanism, it's one thing. It's being able to achieve a negative energy balance. And this is according to PubMed and the National Institute of Health. And really, what makes up a negative energy balance is when you're burning more energy than you're basically
Output is more than input.
taking in, right? I mean, the quality of food has to be good, but either way, this is really the main way you're going to make a
Yeah.
transformation. So there's two things that make that up. It's the movement, and then it's your calorie intake. So what takes our time is actually movement. How you can do that very, very efficiently is by, instead of focusing on a location dependent approach where you have to go to the studio, where you have to go to the gym, focus on a location independent approach. And one that also is probably adaptable as you age as well, as be very, very, very good. What I would argue for and I would support is leveraging something like step count, because step count is something you can do while you're listening to this podcast, while you're traveling. And as long as there's a ground underneath you, you can basically do it. Now, you do have to be tactical about it. You have to get the right amount. But the idea is, if you identify the core requirements and you identify how you can be efficient by attending to these requirements, that's going to make it a lot easier to basically make a transformation. And step count is something even what I use to lose over 70 pounds and actually keep it off.
Oh,
So
wow.
hope that provides perspective that if you challenge the requirements and identify a different way to attend to them, you can make a transformation a lot easier. And I just want to leave that commentary here today. So what we'll do now is go ahead and shift the conversation to Vishal's plans for this year, whether that's professionally or personally.
So I think in terms of my plans for this year, one is actually touching on what you said, which is continuing the physical transformation journey. I found that yoga actually, which India invented maybe a couple thousand years ago, which I
Mhm.
probably ignored for the first maybe 20, 30 years of my life, is actually very powerful. And and there is this guy, I think he's out of India. He does a podcast where he sort of he transmits it, and he's got like 1 million people literally attending every day. And the nice
Yeah.
thing is I can get it on my WhatsApp streaming on my YouTube, so I can be in any hotel in the world. And not only is it so good for me, even now my entire family, my parents, my uncle, aunt, and all who are in the 80s, they're doing it too. And they have seen a massive impact in terms of their ability to walk and be active
Wow.
and do things. And so I think so part of my plan is this year is the physical side, which is to do yoga every day, at least for 30 minutes. Part of it is, as I mentioned, my zest for new countries and new things. And so I certainly want to experience maybe three no, more new countries this year, which I'm sort of working on. And I think a part of it is obviously the transformation that I'm after now. I'm in ed tech with Go Guardian, and I think I see so many possibilities, Arian, to really transform the way we learn and
Mhm.
provide better physical safety and digital safety for our students. And that's the
Like
problem
that.
we're working on.
And where do people learn more about you and your future journey?
They can learn about me on LinkedIn. I'm on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. I'm not on
Excellent.
any other social media.
Okay, no worries. But if I'll be tagging your LinkedIn down below, make sure to check out Vishal there. Thank you for listening. This was Aryan Mohindra and Vishal Gupta.